All right, well, open your Bibles tonight to the book of Luke, chapter 8, verse 26. We have been on Wednesday nights putting our historical journey through our journey through the historical books of the Bible on hold because we have outlines to give you, and we can't do that very well this way. And we've decided to look at some character studies from the scriptures that can affect our character, our walks with God. And so we're going to continue to do those until we meet back together, and then we'll go to our historical book studies. I wanted us to consider tonight, as you're turning to Luke here, an encounter that Jesus had with a demon-possessed man that is recorded in all three of the synoptic gospels. The word synoptic means to see together. And Matthew and Mark and Luke are those three synoptic gospels. John kind of stands on his own. But in Matthew 8 and in Luke here, obviously, chapter 8, Mark chapter 5, we get the story and the plight and the need and the result of the Lord's interaction with this man who will leave this meeting with him completely delivered from his affliction. We read in verse 26, "Then they sailed to the country of the Gadarenes, which is opposite Galilee. And when he stepped out onto the land, there met him a certain man from the city who had demons for a long time. He wore no clothes, nor did he live in a house, but he lived in the tombs." It is about 6 miles across the Sea of Galilee from Capernaum, where Jesus was staying on the west side, to the east side, to a place that today in Israel is called Kurzi. But it is located kind of on the bottom slopes of the Golan Heights. It is called sometimes the Gadarene area or the Gergesene area in Matthew chapter 8, because there were a couple of the Decapolis cities around there, Gadara and Gergesa, that would have given, I think, the name to that area. It is the only place along the Sea of Galilee to this day that has very steep cliffs that fall down into the sea from the mountainside. Most of the ruins there today are caves where there were burial grounds, and it is an important stop on our Israel tour, which so far we are still planning to have in March. So if you're praying about that, that would be a good time to sign up. We notice in verse 27 that Jesus had just crossed over from the other side, and if you read just the 3 or 4 verses before these verses, beginning in verse 22 or so, we learn that Jesus had just come across a very stormy Sea of Galilee. In fact, it had been so stormy that even seasoned fishermen with him awoke Jesus, who was sleeping. They were so afraid that they were going to go down. You remember that Jesus then got up and he rebuked the winds and the raging of the sea, and there was calm. And Jesus says, "Where's your faith?" And they marveled again. They were learning who he is. Who is this man who can even command the winds and the waves to obey him? So they were probably pretty happy to just hit the shores, I would think. I know I would have been, getting seasick as I do. But notice that in verse 27, when they just stepped out of the boat onto the land, they were immediately confronted with this man from the tombs. He was confronted by a single man. We read in Mark's account that there were that this man, when he saw Jesus afar off, still in the boat, had come running towards the dock. Matthew tells us that there were 2 men that lived together in the tombs, and yet one came and the other did not. But they were kind of, exceedingly fierce, possessed by the devil, the original tomb raiders, I guess. Yet Matthew and the other Gospels focus specifically on one of these men and not the other. And I thought about that because so often, when people are going through torment, difficulty, suffering, sin does that for all of us, but life can get pretty tough. It's been tough lately. There are some people who will run to church, not physically now, but they'll run to God. They'll pray, though they have never prayed. But they will not always agree when they find out what Jesus requires of them to follow him. And so they'll call upon him, but then, out of their despair, when that turns a little bit, they turn away. Well, this one man of the 2 came, and he was just at the end of himself. In his despair and in his in his fear and in his suffering, he comes to the Lord drawn to Jesus, immediately so. And these two men kind of, I think, are an exemplary picture of how men respond to the Lord's comfort and direction and invitation. On the one hand, there is the invitation. On the other hand, there is the willingness or the unwillingness to come. The Gospels, at least the three synoptic Gospels, give us lots of information about this man from the tombs. We are told here in Luke that he had demons for a long time, that according to verse 39, he used to have a family and a home, but now he had been forced to live, according to Mark, in the isolation of a graveyard where he would be holed up in some abandoned, maybe burial chambers in the hill. We are told in the Gospels that he was a very violent man, that he would often prevent people, Mark tells us, from even walking up and down the road that went by this place. They would avoid the place. They were afraid of him. He seemed to have unbelievable demonic powers, even tearing out of his shackles and his chains. He was untamable. We read that he shrieked night and day as the demons would rise up to kind of torture him, that he would, Mark says, gash himself with stones, that he would be driven wildly into the wilderness, as we will read here. So get a picture of this man's life, out of control, out of his senses, self-destructive, suffering great loss, scarred for life in many ways. This man was really a work of hell in progress. And a pretty accurate example, on the one hand, of man's inability to save himself, but on the other hand, a very revealing account of what Satan's plans for you would be if he was allowed to just have his way. Usually we see Satan, as we read about him there in 2 Corinthians, as being what looks to be like an angel of light transforming himself. But that's an easier sell, isn't it? Oh, he's for me, he likes me, everything seems to be fine. But here's the devil's real way of life. Here's what he would really like to do. If you go to the book of Revelations and you find him untethered for a time to do almost as what he sees fit, as the Lord lets him run, you get to see the true will of the enemy against God and against God's people, to harass and to harm, to destroy, to oppose, to cause suffering. Paul would write in Ephesians chapter 6 to the Ephesian church that our warfare was against Satan and his hordes. Now, for the believer, for us, it is good news to read in 1 John chapter 4 that we are God's children, and because we are the Lord's children, we have overcome the enemy. And then we read, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. So once I come to the Lord, Jesus comes by his Spirit to dwell in me. My body becomes his temple. There's no way that a Christian can be demon-possessed. The Lord doesn't sublet rooms. He takes the whole temple. But yet the enemy would harass, seek to defeat, oppose you, mislead you, cause doubt and selfishness and pain and hatefulness. It's vital, I think, that we recognize that that's our enemy. It's not your boss, not your wife, not your children. Isn't the red light you get stuck behind or the bad driver that cuts you off. Your warfare is spiritual. And so are the weapons of our warfare. Paul said to the Corinthians, they're not fleshly. They're not. Our strength isn't in our flesh. Our warfare isn't carnal. It is mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds and casting every argument and high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. Or in other words, you fight fire with fire. You fight in the Spirit with God's spiritual strength that he provides for you. So, though Christians can't be demon-possessed, they can certainly be oppressed by the enemy. Our warfare is spiritual. Our weapons are from him. And yet, before we meet Jesus and find life with him, we really are kind of like this man in the tombs. It may not show itself so brutally. It may not manifest itself in such horror. The Lord, in his graciousness, has kept the enemy at bay, and more often than not, people, they get a much easier life to be able to make these decisions. But if you let the devil have his way, this is what you'll get. Hell is going to be a horrible place, because this is the Lord of the hell, and that place that man will find himself without God. So, usually the enemy is far more subtle, but he certainly is not here, and it shows. In verse 28, we then see this confrontation between Jesus and Satan, and it is hardly a fair fight. Notice we read in verse 28, when he saw Jesus, he cried out. He fell down before him. He said with a loud voice to him, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, the Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man, for it had often seized him. He was kept under guard. He was chained with shackles and all, and he broke those bonds and was driven by the demon into the wilderness. In other words, this demon had just dominated this man's life and caused tremendous suffering. But here comes this confrontation between Jesus, who just steps out of a boat that had come out of very rocky shores, and now is confronted by a man possessed by this evil spirit from hell itself. John records Jesus saying to the disciples, "The thief doesn't come except to steal and to kill and to destroy." Jesus said, "But I have come that you might have life, and that you might have that much more abundantly." Mark here that Satan is not your friend. He's not even a friend for a herd of swine, which we will see a couple of verses down from here. Satan's intentions against you are always evil. They know no bounds. He hates you, but God can and will deliver if you but look to him. But I want you to notice the confrontation here. Satan is far more powerful than we are, than this man was, but the minute Jesus shows himself upon the scene, here comes the devil to fall at his feet. The devil's reaction to Jesus' arrival here, according to Mark, was to run towards him, to fall down before him. Proskuneo means to bow down, as to bow down before the king. It's what Paul wrote to the Philippians in chapter 2, verse 10, where he wrote that at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow in heaven, on earth, under the earth. Every tongue will confess that he's the Lord. So we see that in this demon who has so brought terror to this man's life, such misery. He falls down here, verse 28, crying before him, shrieking with a loud voice. And the word really is to shriek. It literally means to just strain your voice. Now, I don't know about you, but just putting myself in the picture, I suspect as bad as that sail of 6 miles over was, where the disciples, these fishermen, thought that they were dying, I think at this point they might have been just happy to get back in the boat. They've survived the storm only to hit the land with this craziness. Notice what this man, or at least the demon in that man, speaks and says. "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torment me." Notice that the demons recognize Jesus' authority over them. They fall at his feet to submit themselves. They beg for his mercy. It's his decision what's going to happen. But they ask for his help. They oftentimes shrieked when Jesus came around. I think if you'll read through the Gospels, you'll find that they come running, and "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God," like in Luke chapter 4. And the Lord didn't allow them to speak because he didn't want their testimony. He wanted to subject them and to teach us that he was the Lord over all. So they beg. And it should teach us, and I hope it teaches you and I, that believing in Jesus isn't enough. These demons believed in Jesus. James said You believe that there is one God and you do well, but even the demons believe that. And they tremble as a result. But know this, your faith without works is dead. So literally, it's not enough to know who Jesus is. He has to be the Lord of your life, to whom you will obey, to whom you will submit your life, so that your works will evidence the faith that you have in him. And that the demons don't do. Mark in Matthew in chapter 8 adds the words, don't torment us before our time. Because if the demons know anything, they're aware that their time is short, that the judgment of God is coming, that Jesus will be their judge, and that there'll be no escape. And that's not just true for the demons, that's true for us. We're going to have to give an answer to the Lord for the way that we lived our lives. Don't torment us seems to be a very wicked request, considering what they'd been doing to this man for such a long time. He had lost his sanity, his dignity, his family, and his life. But don't torment us. Satan, you see, knows no bounds. Well, laying there at the feet of Jesus, begging for mercy, having had explained to us in verse 29 the wickedness they had brought upon this man's life, Jesus now says to the demon, "What is your name?" And he answers by saying, "Legion," because many demons had entered him. The term legion, at least in a biblical sense, described a Roman army of 6,000 men. Now, Satan is a liar. He could very well be exaggerating. He doesn't know how to tell the truth. He's a father of lies. But from all that we read in what follows, there were many. We'll read the words they and them, and the fact that they could run 2,000 pigs off a cliff. There could be a lot, certainly. What we know is there was more than one. One would be enough. Many seemed hopeless, and it was an impossible situation. And then they went back to begging, verse 31. Begging Jesus that he would not command them to go into the abyss. The word is abuso. We find that term in the book of Revelation as the bottomless pit. You might remember that during the tribulation time, from the abuso, the Lord will allow countless demons to spread throughout the land, throughout the world, as locusts for 5 months, to hurt those upon the earth but not kill them. I think that's in Revelation chapter 9. It is also the place, according to the Bible, where some demons are kept chained until this day. They are not allowed to travel. Jude mentions them. We read about them in Genesis as well. And it is the place where Satan will be bound during the millennial reign, the 1,000-year reign of Jesus upon the earth. Don't send us there. We want to run around and do as much damage as we can until the time of the end. Well, we know that in the big picture, anything that they're allowed to do, the Lord uses for his glory, for our benefit. And so they're begging to just be allowed to continue. And they even say in Matthew chapter, this would be Mark chapter 5, don't send us out of the country, or don't send us out of this region. It's a wicked area, these Decapolis Gentile kind of cities, and the demons seem to like it there. Over all of the picture, what we've read, don't lose the fact or the lesson that the Lord has authority. When man seeks to represent God's battle with the enemy in movies or in literature, it always seems like this uncertain fight. You cross your fingers and hope, that he does well, that evil triumphs over good. I remember seeing The Exorcist when it first came out as a young man, and the upheaval, how strong the devil is. Well, if it was you and the devil, maybe so. But between the devil and his creator, the one who made Lucifer, who made, this angel of worship that turned and made a decision, there really is no battle. The Lord is all-powerful. He is the Lord. There is no battle or no contest here. Look at the begging demons falling down in complete fear and complete submission. Just, you memorize 1 John 4:4, greater is he that's in you that's in the world. Well, We read in verse 32 that there was a herd of many swine feeding there on the mountain, and they begged Jesus that he would permit them to enter them, and so he permitted them, and the demons went out of the man and entered into the swine, and the herd ran violently down the steep place into the lake, and they drowned. So the demons see a herd of swine grazing on a hillside and suggest maybe we could go possess them instead. Would you send us there? And Jesus, according to Matthew 8, just spoke one word. All he said was, go. And they went. Again, the ultimate authority. And it is always good to stand behind Jesus when it comes to the enemy. Now, we read there in Mark chapter 5, that the minute Jesus gave them permission, they immediately went. They couldn't wait to destroy something else. Again, it speaks to the heart of the enemy that we face. And notice how large this herd was, 2,000 pigs. Big business, great value. The question is, what are they doing here? Who's keeping them? We know from history that the Decapolis area, at least the 10 largest cities on the east and on the north, were traditionally and largely Gentiles. But we also know that Jesus came first to the Jews. And it could very well be that this was a Jewish community on the east side of the lake raising these unclean animals for profit, very much against the law of God, Leviticus 11, Deuteronomy 14. If that was so, and we believe that it is, then Jesus shuts down this operation with just one word, go. The demons are given the green light. The herd is quickly terrorized. It runs off a cliff into the lake and drowned. Pastor Chuck used to call that deviled ham. It used to get a couple of smiles. I don't know if you're laughing at home. I've heard it before, but it's kind of funny. But the lesson certainly is far more serious. The demons' destructive ways and the authority of the Lord over them. We're not sure what happens to these demons after the swine dies and the host is gone. The Lord just wants us to have this lesson to learn from. Well, after that happens, verse 34, when those who fed them saw what had happened, they fled. They went to the city to tell it to them. They went out to the countryside to tell them. And then they went out to see what had happened and came to Jesus and found the one man from whom the demons had departed. He's now sitting at Jesus' feet. He was clothed. He was in his right mind, and they were afraid. The reaction of, I think, the feeders or the tenders, the minders of the herd is understandable. I suspect they were hirelings. They were given the charge, and we paid for watching over the huge, profit and business that was these pigs. And so they went to tell everyone involved, to give a quick report. Where did the 2,000 pigs go? You ain't going to believe what I'm about to tell you. And so, not able to give much of an account, they wanted to let people know right away, hey, this wasn't our fault. If you go to Israel today, the ruins of the city are less than a mile away from the cliffs, and so they're still very close together. We read here in verse 35 that the owners and the concerned parties, the investors maybe, came running, and the first thing they saw was this man of the tombs who now was fine. He was speaking clearly. He was clothed. He was behaving properly. He had his mind restored. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love, Paul wrote to Timothy, and of a sound mind. And so we find this man here just sitting at Jesus' feet, and they see him, and it frightens them. This is the crazy guy that terrorized the town, him and his buddy. Where's his buddy? But we see him. And the only interaction that they'd ever had with this man, according to what we read here, is that he was kept under guard. Somebody, a big guy, a tough guy, some big tough guys were hired just to keep him off the road and out of the neighborhood. And now they see someone that is just completely changed, and they wondered about that. They had heard from their eyewitnesses, verse 36. They also saw when they also saw it, they also who had seen it told them by what means he had been, who was demon possessed, had been healed. And so the eyewitness account, how the man had come running, how Jesus had landed on the shores of the lake, and how he'd fallen down at his feet and cried out for his deliverance. And then the pigs ran off the cliff, and we came and told you. That's the whole story. Now, reading the story, you would think that the first reaction to everyone in town might have been, wait right here. I'm going to go get my aunt. She's not feeling well. My children who haven't been doing well. I'm going to go to the hospital and bring you whatever. And whoever is suffering, you would think that the first reaction would have been great joy. An immediate request for Jesus to stay. After all, if you remember from John chapter 4, when Jesus came to the Samaritan town and he sat with the woman of Samaria at the well and just began to tell her that he knew her life story about her husbands and her disappointing relationships, that she had said, stay right here. And she ran into town and said, everybody, I met a man who knows everything about me. Maybe he's the Messiah. And she brought the whole city out, though she had very poor reputation in town. And as a result, the people begged Jesus to stay. And he did stay and ministered to them. But here the reaction is so unbelievable. Even though in the Samaritan story there in John 4, the miracle is far less obvious than this. Everyone had an experience with this man. They saw it. They knew about the pigs. In Samaria, it was just a woman with a bad reputation who just was beside herself with excitement about whom she had met. Notice this group of folks are fearful. Verse 35, they were very afraid. Verse 37 says, the whole multitude of the surrounding region of the Gadarenes asked him to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear. So their response was not one of, who are you? Tell us who you are. Get to know him. Ask him to stay. Find out what he knows that you don't know. Instead, they were so afraid, but their fear of what had happened was less dominating in their hearts than the loss of their business. They just wanted Jesus to go away. They asked him to depart, verse 37, from them. Just go away. Don't stay here. How would you ever ask him to leave? What would motivate you to ask him to leave? And the only answer is sin has a way of just causing us to love this life more than the life that he offers to us. To love this way of life, which comes with tremendous difficulty. No eagerness to repent, no eagerness to know better. Their life more important than the life of this man restored. He was changed. The Lord had done that. But rather than saying, do that with me, they said, get out of here. We don't want you here. And their sinful lives exposed by the destruction of their business was of far less value to them than the loss of their business. Their hopes were tied to their profits. And somehow the group wanted nothing more to do with Jesus. In reality, there are two possessions here. There is the possession of a man who's now delivered, and then there's the possession of these business owners, these townsfolk. Possessed by greed and the blindness of sin, they place profit and way of life over deliverance. You know, that old Guns N' Roses lyric that said, if you've got the money, honey, we've got your disease. And I think that's the devil would sing that to the world. Hey, if you want from this life, it's going to cost you, but you're going to be able to have what you want. And the things that they feared most, which I suspect was Jesus' power, his ability to control the situation, the fact that this man of the tombs who'd been with him for years could in a moment be delivered, in a moment by this man, Jesus, that their business could be destroyed in an instant, was what frightened them. And so they begged him to leave. They weren't ashamed of their way of life. They weren't repentant over their sins. They wanted to stay as they were. And this man and this destruction of their pigs threatened all that. And so rather than turn to him, they turned away from him. But you can't have Jesus in your own life as well. You got to choose. You got to pick. I want you to notice at the end of verse 37 some very sad words. This is what we read. And he got into the boat and he departed. Jesus got into the boat to go back to the other side, back to Capernaum. The saddest truth about this story is that Jesus gives them what they asked for. No argument, no fight, no pleading his First Amendment rights, no seeking to break down the doors, no pleads for a better life that he could blend, no forced salvation. He had knocked. They refused to open. And so he leaves. It's such a terse statement, such a short little sentence that says so much. He gave them what they requested. Certainly, for us, there's a great mistake when we try to force people to believe in Christ, to force that down their throats. No. It's God's power of his word and of his spirits that convicts hearts. Strong-arm tactics, maybe they work in business, but they certainly won't work in the church or with the church. God doesn't work that way. He will provide life. He will make the call. God will do what he did. Now the next move is up to you. We declare, he saves. We proclaim, he delivers. So he's available to any who will call upon his name, but he certainly isn't going to stay where he's not wanted. In fact, it appears Jesus might very well have just come here for this man and for his city. His interest was personal. The Lord will meet you where you live. He will find you where you are. He will call you to himself. But you're going to have to come, and usually without the support of the crowds. Verse 38, now the man from whom these demons had departed begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, return to your own house. Tell what great things God has done for you. And he went his way, and he proclaimed throughout the whole city what great things Jesus had done for him. Look at the picture. An entire city begging him to leave. And one man begging to go with him. Delivered in his right mind, touched by God, now willing to lay his life down for him. He'll choose Jesus over the crowds, choose Jesus over the unbelief in the city, follow him despite the opinion of everyone else who had come. And Jesus said no. In fact, I think this is the only place in the Bible where Jesus says no to someone who says, I'd like to go with you. I'd like to follow you. But the reason is given as well. Because though this man was now right with God, the city was far from him. And though they wanted nothing more to do with him, he certainly wasn't ready to give up on them. And so in his love, he sends this man back. Go back to the city from which you have come. Go back and be an example. Be a witness to these who hate God. Your life has been changed. You're a living testimony of what God can do. You can give firsthand information to the world who wants nothing to do with him. And that's really exactly what the church is called to do today. You may not be a Bible scholar or remember 100 verses or where you can turn. It's in there somewhere, and it's good to try to learn and certainly remember. But look, your first line of being a witness is, look what God did in my life. Look at how I used to live. Look who I used to be. And look at what the Lord can do. Go back and tell them what great things God has done for you. It's personal, isn't it? Every time they see you, from now on, they're going to remember that man in the tombs who used to chase them down the road, that caused fear in the hearts of strong men. Show them where you came from. Show them and remind them of what you used to be, and then you'll be my light there. Now, I hope when we get to heaven one day that that we're going to meet a lot of folks from the Gadarene area as a result of this man living his life among them. One saint that touched so many. The fruit of the man of the tombs. Look, any ministry that is vital and birth in God's plan is always that ministry where God has touched one life. One life. He'll touch more, but it starts with you. And the more God can have of your life, the more the work of God can be seen. Jesus wouldn't let him come. In fact, here's how Mark recorded. He says Jesus did not permit him, but he said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them the great things God has done and how he has had compassion upon you." God loved you, and now he'll love them. That was his message. Here's what God's done for me because he loved me. And Mark records that the reaction of the Decapolis cities, those 10 cities round about, was that they marveled. They stood and just were fascinated by what the Lord had done. The message of evangelism is just this. Here's what God has done for me in his love. Here is what God will do for you in his love for you. You live it. It's verified by the way that you live. And the declaration is, love is step one of evangelism. And so these 10 predominantly Gentile cities, 9 of them on the east side actually, one was on the west side of Israel, this man becomes the first missionary to the Gentiles because they were mostly Gentile. And if you read Mark chapter 5 there towards the end, it tells you of his work there. Now, it says that they marveled. The word, I guess maybe the best description of marvel is to stand in admiration of something. It means that the life of this man touched the hearts of many. Whether it was touched sufficiently to bring them to salvation, we don't know. The Lord doesn't report on that. Heaven, I think, will tell us one day. But his testimony was sufficient to where people began to admire him and to listen to what God had done. He began to bring great fruit to bear and a testimony to bear. Maybe sometimes you feel like the man in the story. God has delivered you and you're ready to step off the planet. The world is getting crazy, I watch people all the time. They want to move to areas of the country that are quote unquote better than others. And I'm going to get out of the rat race. I'm going to get out of the hellhole in which I live. Nobody seems to like where they're at. But look, the Lord has put you into the rat race. He's delivered you from sin. He's put you in your right mind. He's clothed you with his righteousness. He's given you an understanding. Maybe you feel like, Lord, let me just get in the boat and get out of here. And yet Jesus would say, stick around. Got work for you to do. I've got people for you to talk to. Go to your family. Go to your friends. I know it's a dark place, but your message is simple. Here's what the Lord has done for me. In his love, this is what the Lord can do for you. Unfortunately, some of us have little to share because we haven't got that kind of walk with the Lord. And so it's hard to have people marveling when we're done talking because we don't have a testimony. And we end up like that second man of the tombs. All we read about is that he was there and walked away. Never really accomplished anything. Yet, if God has truly delivered you like this man of the tombs, then you have a testimony, and it is a powerful one. And it can reach a city, and it can reach a world, and it can reach the country. And all you have to do is tell others what the Lord has done for you and how the Lord has loved you. So, why am I in this situation? Why am I in this circumstance? Why is life so hard? Why can't I? And the answer is, go back. What God has done for you, he wants to do in the lives of others that will listen to you and look to you and find the direction that you found in knowing the Lord. So the Lord said, no, you just go back and tell them the great things God has done for you. So may you be a witness this week. Look, you have a computer, you have email, you can write, you're watching on some kind of an electronic instrument. How about inviting people to join us on Sunday? Start a watch party. How hard can that be? Push a button. There you are. Now you're ready to go. And as you begin to share with people what God has done with you, you'll begin to attract them together. And then in 3 or 4 weeks, whenever the Lord opens the doors for us to meet, you'll be able to bring them along with you. And we'll have to sit differently, and it'll just be a little different. And like I said, if you'll watch on our web page, by the end of the week or so, we'll have a special report of what we're doing, what we've done, what we anticipate, what you should anticipate, what meetings we will have, what we won't have, what we can and can't do. And then we'll just walk through this thing, but at least we'll be on the road to gathering together again. So, look, learn from the man of the tombs. God has more power than the enemy will ever have. If you're willing to fall at his feet, the devil is going to fall there anyway. But we have a choice. If we fall at his feet, he'll change us, save us, deliver us, and use us. And you may want to get delivered completely. Get me out of this world, and that's coming. But while you're here, there's a work to be done. It's not done, and you have something to play, a part to play. So be that example, would you? Father, thank you this evening that you have spoken to us through this man's life. He just kind of appears and disappears in a couple of verses here in the Gospels. He's a man that seems to be in the extreme as far as his suffering, but also his deliverance. And yet we watch and see, Lord, your power set on display, your power over the enemy, your power over his afflictions, your power over the possession even of a person's life. That you can deliver, you move in, you're the Lord of the house, you're the king of the manor, you're the King of kings, you're the Lord of lords. So may we take what you've done for us, may we bear witness to it with others. And like you left this man in a city that wanted nothing to do with the Lord, and he would have liked nothing better than to leave it. You would like and wanted nothing better than for him to be your mouthpiece, your example, your child, your witness in a dark place. Make us those people in our families, at our jobs, in the neighborhood, at school, wherever we're involved. May we tell clearly what the Lord has done for us and of his love. And may you use us as we get through these very odd times and try to figure out how we can be useful. Lord, use us. Electronically, may we just get out there and be your mouthpieces, we pray. In Jesus' name.